Everyone knows what leadership is when it doesn't show up. Most people don't know what leadership is when it does show up. We all have biases, and so we have to recognize that our biases exist. Then our biases influence where our blind spots are, right? So constantly questioning our own blind spots is going to be very important. If we don't have the courage to do that ourselves, we have to surround ourselves with people who we trust enough to call us out on our BS.
All right, let's talk about it, right? Because the show is about making sure you have what is necessary in high performance roles, right? And leadership is a high performance role. Now, you and I have talked about, not on camera, recorded, around the idea that there's lots of room for bad leaders to hide, right? And as a salesperson who's kind of had to deal with leaders who don't really understand the sales function, I felt that pain. I'm sure you felt that pain as well. Let's start this show just kind of talking about, at a core level, how does someone know if they're really ready to step into that leadership lane?
Well, the real problem or the real challenge that exists with leadership roles is really twofold. And I talk about this a little bit in my book, which I'll say early, 12 Rules for Leaders, the Foundation of Intentional Leadership. Everyone knows what leadership is when it doesn't show up. Everybody knows what it is when it doesn't show up. Most people don't know what leadership is when it does show up. This is why we have 400,000 books on leadership on Amazon.com. This is why we have another 100,000 published every year. This is why everyone from Ray Dalio to Chicken Soup for the Soul comments and bloviates and talks about leadership. This is why I'm talking about leadership today, because while we know what leadership is not, we don't know what leadership is. And this is one of the fundamental building blocks into knowing when to step into leadership. The other fundamental building block, and this is the second thing that we always talk about in leadership, is, are leaders born or are they made? Is there a certain set of skills you have to have, or is it just natural charisma? Now, there's a bunch of leadership theories about this. I'm not going to bore your listeners with all that nonsense today. I don't believe in theories. I believe in practice, right? And so we have these two areas, right, that are moving alongside each other. I don't know if I'm skilled enough or if I have to be charismatic. And I recognize leadership when it happens or when it doesn't happen, but I don't pay attention to it when it is happening because it's just natural like air. And so a person is walking along these two twin tracks, right? Or moving along these two twin tracks. And guess where they wind up at? The clearing at the end of the path, which is all of a sudden they're looking around and now they're the leader. Everybody's looking at them saying, hey, you made it down this track. You made it to the clearing at the end of the path. Congratulations. Yay. Here's your parting gift. You're now a leader. And no one tells people when they're walking down those tracks what the skill sets are to get down them. No one actually points out the things that they are learning along the way, like managing conflict, putting together and dealing with teams, dealing with dysfunction and a much overused word in our time, trauma, getting people to high performance and vaunting them over the side to the next level, behaving with humility, right? And stepping back to allow others to lead. No one points those areas out to folks when they're on those two twin tracks and they wind up accidentally in the clearing at the end of the path. And all of my work is about teaching people how to not wind up there accidentally. One of the things that we talk about is the intentional application of effective leadership practices. And so how does a person know that they're ready? Well, you don't know, but you have to recognize when those two tracks are and where they are there. And particularly in a sales role, right? Where it's very easy to sort of sit back in the tall grass and have a bunch of other people do stuff for you. And then you wind up in this clearing and you have no clue how you got there.
Oh man. So that's one of the things that I'm so excited to talk about with you specifically, because what happens in sales is so common and consistent, right? So what happens, there's an opening, you just take the top performer and you ship them into the management role, right? And then it's, people are confused and bewildered why production suffers, why this person isn't ready to coach or manage or lead. And then you see all the arguments on LinkedIn and on social media of well, those who do, and those who can't teach. And they don't even know that they're quoting a play badly, And does that, so I'm curious from your perspective and your point of view in other areas of leadership, is it is it that consistent? Well, let's just take the best person from a numbers perspective and put them into the leadership role. Is it that common outside of sales, or is this just like a thing that only happens in sales?
Tragically, this is a thing that happens almost everywhere without fail.
Okay.
The person who doesn't fall on their face the most often wins.
Okay. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
because they haven't really conceptualized, they haven't really analyzed, they haven't critically thought about why they didn't fall on their face, they just survived. The number one survivor, like that show on TV, winds up being the person who's now the leader. And this is where you get not bad leadership, not good leadership, but you get mediocre leadership. And I've written about this for many, many years, and I've been pushing this idea for many, many years. Mediocre leadership is actually more toxic than bad leadership.
Why? Because it's harder to see?
Because it's harder to see, that's number one. And number two, it allows people to pretend like production is really happening when in reality, all these other things are going on.
Yeah. Right. The vanity metrics versus the real metrics, right? The
Bingo.
things that really move the business.
Well, in bad leadership, like everybody goes, okay, well, bad leadership is clearly bad. And we can see this at a nation state level. So let's, we always bring up the nation state examples. Everybody knows what the bad leadership nation state examples are. I'm not going to bring them up. But we can clearly see when a leader is oriented down those two twin tracks, but is doing it with intentionality and is going to wind up in a bad place. We can see bad leadership. We can also see leadership that we identify as good. When again, that leader is on those two twin tracks, they're going towards a place that everybody agrees is a good place to get to, and boom, they're there. But mediocre leadership, oof. Mediocre leadership is the worst because there's no direction, there's no guidance, there's no goal at the end of those two twin tracks, and there's a lot of excuse making and a lack of accountability about why that goal isn't made, and that's toxic in our organizations, our cultures, starting in our families all the way up to our nation state level.
Oh my gosh. Okay, so we're gonna dive into this. Okay,
yeah.
If someone is in a leadership role. Okay, but they're not holding it well. They're not doing a good job. Okay, what should they be looking for themselves to indicate that there's some red flags here? They're not, because like it used to be people got groomed for leadership, right?
Right.
And in big corporate organizations, there's still leadership development people that are on staff. And once you get the nod, you get groomed and you go on a process and everything else like this. But in small business and entrepreneurship, it doesn't go that way, right? And that's
right.
Most of my clients, right? So smart people that have figured something out, and now some of them are like just wilding out and like kind of trying to figure it out, right? Which leads to some of that bad leadership, in my opinion, because I don't think you need to know every aspect of the business yourself, but if you don't know it, you need to pay well enough so that way you can have someone who does know it well, right? And in sales, this means not just hiring a commission-only closer because they reached out and said that they can take your calls and thinking that that's going to go swimmingly. But in your experience, right, not in a sales role, because sales is one of these it's harder to hide in sales than I would say in most other leadership roles, because you can formulate a report that validates your existence. It doesn't mean you're actually doing the work. How does a leader know if they're on that path to the clearing and it's going to be troublesome when they get there? What should they be looking for?
The biggest thing probably that you need to be looking for is, and these kind of things these two things go together, but I think I'm going to focus on the bigger one first, and then I'm going to focus on maybe the next largest one second. The biggest thing you need to be looking for is a fundamental lack of self-awareness.
Oh, yeah.
So, if you're going along and you think things are going swimmingly, there's probably something you're not paying attention to.
Okay. That's fair.
Okay. Now, if you have a click, and usually, by the way, and a lot of these things happen in an intangible and sort of subjective way, which again is why there's 400,000 books on leadership, right? So you're going to take a sales team from organization B and a sales team from organization C, and there's going to be different intangible clicks inside of that sales organization, inside of that sales team, even if they're under the same umbrella of corporation A. There's going to be fundamentally different different clicks, because the subjective interactions between people inside of those teams are going to be different. But we don't like to acknowledge that, particularly at a corporate level. We like to flatten everything out and make everything be this sort of base, blasé, middle of the road kind of experience for everyone. Now, in a small or medium-sized entity, in an entrepreneurial or more of a consultative type role, one of the things that we have to pay attention to is this idea that if things are going swimmingly, we've probably missed something. This requires an element of self-awareness. Now, you will hear, and I've worked with enough leaders and I've worked with enough folks in management before, and we can talk about the difference between management and leadership in a minute. But I worked with folks, I worked with folks in management before where they have had those moments, and it might have been in a team meeting. It might have been in a one-on-one interaction. It might have been on a phone call where they felt subjectively that something was off the rails, but they ignored that feeling and put it to the side.
Oh, yeah, man. Yeah, absolutely. And I call it the pit of fire.
There you go.
Right?
Okay.
Because it's like this down in the belly, right? And we're both martial artists, and the pit of fire came from like this feeling that pressure on a test day, right? And like, when you've tested multiple times in martial arts, right, you're just used to it, right? It's kind of an engine for you and everything. And then, you see some new guy who's doing their first test and they're so, oh my God, I'm so nervous, and it's like, cool, we all are, bro. This is a performance, congratulations. It's supposed to be uncomfortable.
Or the trial guy who comes in to do the first, whatever. Not to go too far down this road, but the trial guy who comes in and he just wants to try out because I just see red, bro.
Oh yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's good. That's cool. Actually, I recently had a trial guy come in to the dojo where I train, and he was a military guy with a wrestling background or whatever.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm in the martial art that I am in, I'm not going to get into what it is here, but we can maybe do that later if we want. But in the martial art that I'm in, I'm a white belt. I'm a nobody, right? Yep. But I've been there at least 2-3 years now. So he walks in, he's like, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. And I could see he was going to spaz, and spazzing is it's the fire in the belly moment. And he's spazzing and he doesn't know what to do. And he never came back. Yeah,
man, it's like, I've seen so many people come in feeling high and mighty, right? And then you're just not prepared, and it's no one's fault, and it's meant to be a culling, right? Like, most people don't make it to black belt, right? Like, you have a black belt in another art and started over. I have a black belt in another art and started over as well. And like, man, talk about being able to start over and like empty the cup and show up and be the beginner and not just the guy who's like, well, in my old school, like, because we've seen those leaders and managers as well, right?
That's right.
Oh
That's
my gosh,
right.
man. Okay, so going back to this, right? So how do you know? Mm-hmm. Because it almost sounds like you're being like, okay, you got to keep your head on a swivel, which I can appreciate, right? I'm prior service, right? And that's fine. But man, blind spots are abundant. You don't even know to go look for them. I don't know that there's a better label for a thing than blind spots, because you don't even know to go look in this direction until you're aware of it. So how do people deal with that anxiety, that feeling that there's something there, but they're not sure like how to get to it?
Yeah. So in order to deal with blind spots, and again, I coach people through this process. And so if you're listening, I'm going to give you a short, sort of 2-minute idea about this, but trust me, the game is deep, right? As DMX used to say back in the day. So let me go 2 minutes on this deep game.
Please.
In order to determine where your blind spots are, you do need to understand that you have, and this is a place where I do agree fundamentally with the diversity, equity, and inclusion folks, or the social justice folks who are training in their spaces and doing their things. I do agree with this idea. And it is a fundamentally true idea. We all have biases, and so we have to recognize that our biases exist. Now, what you do with those after, that's where we part, right? And how you sort of deal with those is where we part. But we do have to recognize that we have them. I do agree with that. Then our biases influence where our blind spots are, right? So constantly questioning our own blind spots, constantly questioning that quadrant of the unknown unknowns, as Donald Rumsfeld said back in the day, is going to be very important. If we don't have the courage to do that ourselves, here's the piece that we often forget about. We have to surround ourselves with people who, and this is going to be a key word here, who we trust enough to call us out on our BS. That's fundamentally it. And look, if you're on a team, on a sales team, and you're the top sales performer, and you are running and gunning, and no one can call you out because you produced last month 10% over the month before, and 10% over the month before, and 10% over the month before. I'm sorry. I'm going to say something here on this podcast today, and I want you to listen to me very closely. Your stuff still stinks.
Oh, I rail against the whole rainmaker mentality of selling, right? And that's what it is, right? Because most people, there's an area of sales where everything is blueprinted and dialed in, and people have their touches and their cadences and their sequences and everything. And that's a very small segment of like how like businesses actually treat sales. Everything else is still the rainmaker thing, right? And so it's, hey, we're coming up on the end of the month, and then there's like the lights come on and the roaches are scrambling and everything to go find something to do. And you always hit goal, but there's always a sweat, there's always a deadline punch, there's always like this huge scramble, as opposed to like, hey, what if we just do a little bit every day? What if we just like,
well, and rainmaking will not save you. Like rainmaking doesn't. Mark Cuban, the owner of the Dallas Mavericks, infamously says that sales cures all ills.
Yep.
No, Mark, it doesn't. Sales cures the ills of production. It cures the ills of revenue. But there's more things operating in the organization than revenue and production. There's also people. There's marketing, there's operations. And by the way, because we have people operating underneath all of those processes, there's all of the intangible, subjective things that are going on between those people that are not cured by the sales revenues that were generated that are going to go to your top line producers or are going to be showing up in bonuses and commissions to people who are in the C-suite.
That's fair. Very good.
Okay. Yeah. So that's a more nuanced take, but I understand we don't live in a world of nuance anymore. So I get it where Mark gets to say those kinds of things. But fortunately, that's why we have
really
podcasts.
Well on social media.
It does. It plays, and God,
that's
it shows
why this
up really
show's
well.
An hour, sir. So that way we're not just in here throwing around social media headlines that are boiled down past the point of being usable, but because we know that they're going to get good mileage, right?
Well, and we don't want to. Do we want to be feeding people milk or meat? Like, what do we want to get out of your experience? And again, this goes back to where are our biases, where are our blind spots as not only as leaders, but also as sales performers. So the things that we should be, I would assert, the things that a high performing sales professional should be pursuing are the things they are uncomfortable with in order to become a better leader. So if you're uncomfortable, I don't know, dealing with an HR process, lean into that. Matter of fact, find somebody you trust who can help you lean into that. We want to get really practical here and get out of the clouds and get into the dirt. Find somebody you trust who can guide you through that process. Spend a day working in operations.
Yeah.
Spend a day working in marketing. Spend a day working next to someone who is in the C-suite who just wants to ramble and talk and go to meetings all day. Spend a day with that person, right? The areas where you feel uncomfortable, those should be the areas that you move towards. And normally I don't say should. Normally I say I recommend or I suggest. This I believe so strongly that I'm willing to put a should behind it. Because here's the thing. High performance teams can cover each other and can move behind each other when one fails. And cohesive teams can do that. When one person fails, someone else can step up. And by the way, if this were a podcast focused around the HR professional, if this were a podcast focused around the operations professional, I would say the exact same thing.
So far, I was a sales guy who didn't really appreciate sales or marketing until I moved into small business. And then there was no marketing. There was no name to kind of help kind of drive the thing forward. And that's when I was like, oh, maybe there is something to this marketing thing, and kind of had to go spend some time figuring that out. The awareness track is, I think, where it all starts, right? Because I spent about 10 years in sales, not being super coachable, not being super open until I did the awareness track with my coach, right? And then that opened up to all the blind spots. And I think the thing that you're saying that I think most people would miss is this concept of accountability that I think we're kind of like edging around, right? And it's kind of an uncomfortable label and lots of people turn away from it and everything else like this. But like good accountability, oh man, like there is not anything better, right? But good accountability is not someone who's just going to bust your chops whenever you miss a goal. It's someone who's going to call you on your crap before you miss the goal, right? They're so connected to you and your goals and your work that they can see those blind spots for you before you can. And then when they call them out to you, you hear it, as opposed to getting defensive and just pushing. Well, you can't tell me you don't know what it's like for me and all this other stuff, So good accountability paired with awareness, I think, is probably the path most people need to be on. But most people are thinking that they don't need that accountability, right? Because I know what I'm going to do. And I talk to people all the time, John, I could make cold calls if I really needed. You pretend like you need to. Let me see you pretend like you need to. And then let's talk about what's actually happening. And then it's just endless procrastination, right? And then they can't even see that it's a blind spot until I like almost beat them over the head with it, which is very interesting.
Well, and people are going to do more of, in general, in sales or in any other area of the organization or the enterprise, people are going to do, in general, what they are most comfortable with. For sure, yes. But absolutely. They're also going to do what the organization permits.
Yeah, yeah. Are we going to talk about leaders versus managers now?
We can talk about leaders versus managers.
Is that where we're going next?
That's where we're going next. Let's talk about that. So, a manager fundamentally can engage in the aspects and in the behaviors of leadership. Managers do this all the time. Mm-hmm. So, when you have a person who is creating or is putting together a team, that is a process that walks the line between management and leadership. And many people default to the side of management of that because it's easy. Yeah. It's easy to manage a team versus lead them. And here's at the nuts and bolts level, here's what managing a team looks like. Managing a team looks like having a meeting, assigning different accountabilities, making sure that people follow up on those accountabilities, making sure the emails get answered and the chat messages and the Slack things all happen in the same order that they're supposed to happen. And then at the end of the day, at 5 o'clock or 6 o'clock or 7 o'clock or 8 o'clock, wiping the digital sweat off of your brow and saying, I put in a good day, and getting your check and going home. Now, I'm not minimizing that. Look, we have had management in the course of human history going all the way back to the freaking Egyptians when they put up the pyramids. You can't tell me that there weren't managers for those stones. They were on the top of those pyramids. Of course they were managers. Give me a break. Right. So we've had management. Everybody knows what management is, but management is not leadership. Leadership is fundamentally something different, and it's on the other side of the line. Go ahead. Yeah.
But okay, so, oh man, because I try to keep things out of a black or white state for myself, because I love black or white states. It's part of my personality.
Sure.
So,
I'm going to be nuanced, but go ahead.
Is it okay for a manager to be like, you know what? I don't need to be a leader.
Yes, it's fine. I mean, that's that is how most of the big organizations that we laud and that we look back on with rose-colored glasses in the 20th century ran from Owens Corning. I used to live in the Northeast, so from Owens Corning and IBM all the way to Ford and Chevy. Like that, those were management-driven organizations. They weren't leadership-driven organizations. Much of the 20th century, much of the Industrial Revolution ran on that management model. And the IBM guy, the manager that came in with the white shirt and the black tie and the perfect haircut and the horn-rimmed glasses, and was going to manage you into producing the next thing for the IBM, whatever computer they were going to pump out in Endicott, New York. Nothing wrong with management. I have no opposition to management. Matter of fact, there are some people who probably need to be managers rather than being leaders.
Ooh, let's talk. Okay. Oh man. Okay.
It's fine.
Man, I have my questions have questions based upon what you just said there. So give me a second. So What is the distinction indicating you need leadership versus, hey, management is fine? Like what is the difference in environment that would necessitate a move in the leadership direction versus being okay with just like staffing a bunch of managers?
Sure. So look at your org chart. This is the very simple answer. Look at your org chart. And as your org chart scales to infinity, you're going to need, just fundamentally, you're going to need managers rather than leaders. And you're going to need more managers rather than leaders. Now, the folks who are listening to this podcast may not be in a place of scale, right? So if you're in a smaller organization where you're not in a place of scale, or if you're an entrepreneur, let's say you're running an organization of 100 people, you will have probably, in an organization of 100 people, you'll have 2 to 5 manager types, but you'll probably have 1 to 3 leaders. Now, you could take those 2 to 5 manager types, and again, nothing wrong with it. I'm not down on management, but you could take those folks that are really interested in the day-to-day moving forward of a process inch by inch, which is fundamentally what management is. You can take those folks and try to mold them into leaders, but this is going to require a different way of thinking about their role. This ties into accountability now. So let's talk about accountability. I'm a big fan of 2 books, and I'm going to mention them both here on the podcast, not because I'm giving them shout outs, but because I am a big fan of these books. One is called The Oz Principle, which is about accountability, and how that scales across the organization. And then the other book that I think pairs really well with that is a book that both you and I know. And when I say this book, you'll know who I'm talking about: Extreme Ownership. Okay. But I think you have to have both those books together. I don't think you could have one or the other. And I've facilitated both of those books. I've read both of those books. I've done podcast episodes about both of those books. Okay. And both those books paired together solve for the management and not management, I'm sorry, solve for the accountability and scale problem. And so the problem of scale with accountability is, as you get larger, no one takes any more accountability because they can hide. We already mentioned this. But when you're small, everyone has to take accountability. That's an idea of extreme ownership, because there is nowhere to hide. And I think fundamentally, as our economy has shifted away from the vast majority of of leadership and management roles inside of the workplace being filled by 20th century legacy organizations, we are in a shift towards smaller and smaller teams doing larger and larger work that's more and more meaningful, which means leadership actually matters more. And you could, by the way, you could watch this in the uptick of books on leadership. As our economy started to shift in the 70s and 80s, the number of books published on leadership started to tick up, and the numbers of books published on management started to go down. It's because things are shifting around in our economy. And while human beings tend not to view these things at a macro level because it's just too much, at a micro level, you can see this in your individual organizations and your individual cultures. Okay. If I'm on a small team out of an organization of 100 people, I better be taking accountability for everything that's in my sphere of influence. And that's quite a lot. That is attraction stuff. That's right. That's attraction. Exactly. That's the traction stuff. I believe Gene Wickman is the author of that book. That is Gino Wickman. There you go. Gino Wickman. So yes, that's the traction stuff. And I know people who swear by traction, by the way. Great tool, and great tools inside of that book. But even if you don't do that, just looking around and going, what are the areas I'm not taking accountability in, will shift you from management to a more of a leadership focused mindset. Just asking yourself that one question, and then checking your biases, having people that you trust around you. And then here's the other piece of it. Now you could take this idea from management of processes and systems and check marking boxes. Now you could take that idea, move it over, break things down break those acts that you need to do in order to take advantage of, or to not to take advantage of, but to fix or to mend those areas where you haven't been paying attention. Break those processes down, and now you can walk through them step by step. And now you're subtly shifting back into management. And now, I know you said you're not a white guy, and I wanted to make this very nuanced. Now you're walking back and forth across that line. You're walking back and forth across the line. And that's a very practical, tactical way to do this. And intentional, by the way. You want to do it with your brain on. And I haven't really talked about self-awareness yet, but we can maybe talk about that a little bit later.
Interesting. Okay, so I need to think through that answer, but let's talk a little bit more about the self-awareness thing, right? I'm a huge fan of DISC, obviously, right? We had a podcast about it, 85 episodes and everything. I'm a DISC facilitator, do it in all my hiring and working with teams and everything like that, because it's blunt enough that you can use it in a sales conversation, right? Like I think all of them have greatness in the ability to kind of like open you up, right? To be looking for things. Is there an assessment you really like for helping people get started on the path?
Right. So I am also a DISC certified facilitator. Got that certification many years ago. I wander back and forth on DISC. I think that DISC is good in certain situations, but I also think that some teams can invest too much in it, just like any other psychosocial, psychocultural measurement tool.
Yeah.
Some of the science, because I do look at the science, some of the science underneath DISC, I won't say it's questionable. I wouldn't go that far, but I would say it can definitely go either way. And I'm a big fan of archetypes, like Jungian archetypes. Okay. And as I've gone through DISC and facilitated DISC and done some looking into the research, the psychosocial and the psychological research under DISC, I become a lot more of a fan of the big five personality typings, which are more Jungian in their focus, and directly relate to observable behaviors. That's not a nitpick. That's just a difference that I've gone down myself. Okay. But DISC is perfectly serviceable because a lot of people don't want to get that deep into it, right?
Yeah.
So,
absolutely.
and teams don't have the time to get that deep into it. I'm a consultant in this space. I'm a trainer in this space. I have time to go down those rabbit holes.
Same.
Okay.
Yeah. It's part of the job. Yeah.
It's part of the job. Exactly.
to be worth your salt of talking about these things, you kind of need to know the differences, in my opinion. Otherwise, you just end up becoming the hostile apostle and like
exactly.
drinking way too much of the Kool-Aid. So.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
So I've used in my facilitation processes, and coaching processes, I've used DISC. I've used the True Colors communication inventory, which was developed by Don Lowry back in the 70s. That's a nice, lightweight, sort of gossamer-like, communications inventory. It's not as deep as DISC. The science isn't nearly as deep underneath it, and you could just kind of throw it at people, and they feel happy.
Yeah, they feel great about it. Yeah, it's not really challenging or forcing like introspective reflection. But
no,
I'm a blue. Okay, great.
Right, I'm an orange. Now I can open the door to some other things on you.
Yeah, for sure.
You've now given me permission to open the door on some of your other blind spots.
Yes, absolutely.
I'm not a big fan of MBTI for a whole variety of different reasons. I think it's overused.
The cult-like nature of that whole community is a little rough.
Well, and the science underneath there, and have you
read the book?
Yes.
Yeah, the book. Yeah. Because I was like, because I know a whole lot of very loud people who love Myers-Briggs. And then someone was like, oh, you should go read this book, right? And I'm blanking on the name of the book, but really...
Personality Brokers.
Yes, that was it. I listened to that book and I was like, this is astounding, right? Like the fanaticism of the woman is a little bit crazy.
It's almost... Well, what it did was it explained for me why I see Star Wars in your MBTI's type kind of thing sometimes floating around. It explained, because I couldn't for the life of me figure out why I was seeing that. and I thought there's got to be some reason why this is floating around in the world. And then I read Personality Brokers and I went, oh, that clicked over in my head. Got it. Now we're good. Now we're done. And so I very rarely facilitate MBTI. I mean, I'll do it if clients ask for it, but I very rarely facilitate that. And then for me, the highest order one of these assessments, honestly, is the Strengths Finder or Strengths Quest assessment that has been put together.
Strengths Quest. What is that?
Mm-hmm.
Is that also by Gallup?
Yep, that's also by Gallup. Yep. Huh. So Strengths Quest is their higher education version. And then Strengths Finder is their more business / corporate or oriented version. It's the same research from Gallup that's organized underneath that.
Okay.
And I think where Gallup gets to, for me in my mind, the two things that or the insight that Donald Clifton had in the 60s and 70s and was able to use Gallup to get to that insight was this. People grow in particular strengths, things they do well over the course of time. And so what Gallup did, because they're a polling organization, what they did was they started talking to people between 14 and 99, and they began to like really measure that thesis. And they've measured that thesis consistently and updated it over the course of the last now, I think almost 55, almost 60 years. So the data set is just robust. It's a huge data set.
And no one talks about this, but the sample size matters in like anything, like, oh man, sample size really matters, because if you collect enough data, you can't argue with it anymore. But if your sample size is garbage, right, you're going to draw whatever conspiracy theorist ideas you have from the data points you've been able to collect over a frighteningly small sample size.
Yes, and the Gallup organization's data set and data size is not just the United States. This is the other insight. It's also global.
Oh,
and so, I didn't know that. Right. And so for me, that's top of the mountain. That's really, really good.
All right. I'm going to dive in here because I've done strength finders, right?
Yep.
And I think it's helpful for uncovering your own blind spots, your own biases, and everything else like this. I don't know anyone, I mean, maybe you could, who would be able to kind of like label and type someone else of their strengths in a conversation, right? So like, it feels like it's one of those things that it's only really useful for the self, or if everyone on the team is using it. But like, for me as a sales guy, the thing about DISC that I really like so much is it helps me have the conversation the way that they want to have it, right? Which is why we put so much focus on it, because as a revenue professional, as a sales guy, if you're talking at them versus talking to them, because you're a D type who wants to win, and you're just not paying attention to the fact that this S type wants everyone on their team to get along, and you're just like, do you want it or not? And then you're burning bridges and burning leads and burning relationships. And like DISC is helpful, especially with salespeople, of being able to kind of, first of all, start on a path of self-awareness, but then also improve their conversations drastically, because then you can kind of map to the other person and everything. My one bone to pick with both like Enneagram and Strength Finders is the fact that like, it doesn't really seem like it's something you can use proactively when you're dealing with other people. It feels just like something you go on like a solo quest to go figure out.
So I would actually agree with that. And the way that I've seen StrengthsFinder used and leveraged on teams, you're right. It is very much an internally focused, how do we put our strengths together so that this puzzle makes sense on this team kind of idea. You're right. It is not externally focused, because you would have to go out and actually that's one of the explicit things that that StrengthsFinder actually says is, you've got to. We don't want this to be used for labeling other people external to yourself, right? So I may spot. I'll just name a strength here. I may spot ideation, or I may suspect that John has ideation somewhere as one of his strengths based on external behaviors I see him doing. But it's incumbent on me, if I understand how strengths work, to not label him that way and to not go forth in that way unless I'm going to actually give him StrengthsFinder and have him go through the assessment to see if I'm wrong. Whereas DISC, you're correct. This is a distinction with a difference. DISC is externally focused more than internally focused, because so I'll use my own DISC typing as an example here. I'm a DI. I'm a high D, and then like the I is subservient there. And then I think everything else after that, I think I have a C, and then I have an S way down there at the bottom somewhere. And as I've gone through more experiences in my time, I've had to learn where to put that D forward and where to bring that D back.
Oh, yeah. Like, but that's real awareness, right?
But that's real awareness, right?
It's not like you do, because I get this pushback from people all the time. John, I'm deeper than one personality assessment. Well, of course, obviously. That's like, and I am not a fan I know some organizations that do DISC as a black or white hiring assessment, especially for salespeople. So for those people, if you don't come across as a DI, you're not getting an interview, which I think is stupid, because the way that we use it is like, hey, are you coachable? Are you aware that some of this stuff is going to be hard for you? Because if you're aware that it's going to be hard for you, we can plot a path of performance and development, so that way it becomes easy for you, something you can do without having to sweat it and think about it and everything else. But if you're not willing to kind of look at it honestly, and I did not do a good job of this, because my coach showed me who I was and then went and told my business partner, hey, maybe not John, because he's a C type, right? Because he'd never coached a C to sales success before, right? And my business partner had just finished reading Rocket Fuel, right? And the whole idea of like visionary versus integrators and everything else like that. And he had just like a moment of clarity that he was only hiring people who were just like him. So high I types. And every time it got a little bit stressful, everyone just scrambled trying to like create around the blockage, as opposed to like putting the head down, driving through, getting it done. And he just finished that book, and he was like, you know what? I've only ever hired people who were just like me. I'm going to try to offset my differences. Okay. Which brings me to this next question, right? If you're a leader, how important, and a leader, not a manager, right? Just for the being specific, how important is it to go out and cultivate balance in your personality makeup, right? Versus, I'm just going to go hire people that are just like me because I know exactly how to motivate them and coach them and talk to them and everything else like that.
Yeah. So if you are a leader and you are uncomfortable doing something, you have one of two options. You could either go into that uncomfortability and solve that problem yourself to whatever the depth of your talents and skills are. Or, to your point, you could hire somebody else. Now, that again goes to scale and, of course, revenue and resources and things like that. But you could hire somebody else to cover that spot that you're weak in. Except the challenge here is that...
I was waiting for the except, by the way. I was like, there's no way he's just going to let that lie. But, sorry, continue.
No, you're right. I wasn't. Except here's the problem. They'll have their own weaknesses.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Okay. And their weaknesses are only going to be as strong, or are going to be as strong as potentially your greatest strengths, potentially, right? Mm-hmm. But you're going to have to spend some time working with them. So the example you talked about being hired as a C by a bunch of I's, right? You're going to have to work with them. You're going to have to commit to working with that person that you've hired to cover your weakness, to build up their own strengths. And this is a massive two-step that many leaders fail at, because it's so hard, because it requires not only the self-awareness that you may get from a personality exam, but, and by the way, the personality exam is just the beginning of the self-awareness. The self-awareness, it's first of 1,000 steps. Yeah. You may understand or have some self-awareness from that, but now you have to do a deep dive into self-awareness work on yourself. And so I look at, and I recommend when I'm doing my coaching and when I'm doing my consulting with teams, I recommend that before you go out and hire somebody else, physician, heal thyself. Go to the ends of the earth to figure out what you don't know and get some. And by the way, coaching is cheap. Consulting is cheap in comparison to hiring a person. Go get a coach, go get a consultant, go get some outside help and start working on yourself to become a better leader. By the way, if you want to do this just, before you go get a coach or a consultant, there's very simple things that you could do. Obviously, you could take DISC or any other personality, testing will probably be helpful for you. But the second thing that most people in general forget is journaling. I'm a big fan of leaders journaling. And I don't care if you journal in a private blog that you never share with anybody, or if you journal via podcasting in a private podcast or a public podcast, where if you have the bravery to do so, where you talk with people about things you don't know and ask them questions and you're willing to say, I don't know, and then incorporate those ideas into your own practice. Or the third way you can do it, and this is the way most people will do because they don't want to blog or they don't want a podcast, go get yourself a nice notebook from Barnes and Noble. Yes, I did say the brand, or Half Price Books, or Books A Million, or any of those other bookstores that are on street corners everywhere. Still in America.
Yeah, go buy some books, please.
Go buy those books, right? Go buy a journal and call it My Leadership Journal. And then every day, and maybe don't start with every day, start with 3 times a week, Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. You're going to take some time in your office to write for 5 minutes about what you did successfully today as a leader. You do that every day or every 3 days, every week for 90 days. Now you're going to start growing in self-awareness as a leader.
Man, I'm so glad you talked about journaling, because I think it's, I don't think you can go around saying that you're on a path of self-awareness if you're not reflecting on your actions and your thoughts and the things that got in the way and where you stood in your own way and where you did well. And my coach was adamant. John, you should be journaling. Nah, I'm good. I don't need it. I just need more doors, right? And then eventually I started to journal, and it was helpful, right? And then it becomes its own developmental practice in and of itself. It'll change you, you'll change it. And then, you're going to have some periods to where it's like, it doesn't really feel like it's helping you, right? But being able to haul it out of your head and look at it is the most important part, because journaling kind of like changed for me when I saw this person talking about the idea that a Mac and a PC are the exact same core components, but how it is wired through the coding and the commands that it tells itself create the difference, right? So if you're in a performance role and you're not looking at your actions and how you spend your time and everything else like this, and also how you're viewing yourself as doing these actions, you're looking at a peephole at the world, right?
Yeah. Well, so let's break this down to something even more practical for folks.
Please,
if you're in a performance role, you probably get up in the morning, or maybe in the afternoon, or maybe in the evening, at some point in time in your day, you probably go to the gym.
Yeah, it's so weird to me, because like I thought this was just like a sales thing, right? Because like coming up in sales, like every high performing salesperson I know also has like a mastery habit that is quite often gym, right? A lot of times it's martial arts, right? Sometimes it's hiking or running or something else like this. But every high performer that I've ever met in sales has some sort of meditative mechanism that they use. And it's funny because in sales, everyone talks about like, hey, like you're not scared of the phone after you've been like lifting heavy iron for, all this stuff, right? And it's like, there is this thing about doing hard things that makes you more excited to go do more hard things,
Yes. And inside of every one of those high performers, I'm going to bet, I have absolutely no data for this, but I'm going to bet.
I love a great wager. Let's go.
Yeah. This is where my intuition is taking me. I'm going to bet that every single one of those high performers, whether they're hiking, running, lifting, martial arting, even if they're hula hooping, I don't care what it is. I'm going to bet, and by the way, all of you can respond to this episode by sending John an email. Don't send it to me. Please.
I'm going to read all of the singles upon singles of emails. This is going to be amazing. Please flood my inbox.
But every single one of those high performers, or almost every single one of those high performers, tracks their performance in those things.
Well, I think that is that's the removal of the blind spot, right? Because when I started my business, it was just to give people CRM so that way they couldn't lie to themselves anymore, right? Like it was not to be a coach or a trainer or place people or anything. I just wanted to give to other people a mechanism that allows them to find a path of improvement, as opposed to, well, they didn't know what they wanted and screw that guy and all this stuff that we tell ourselves as salespeople that make us jaded, right? It reinforces the sales stigma, right? And journaling was my kind of path through that for me. But man, if you're not looking for that stuff, right? It's just super easy to just kind of become jaded, because you hear everyone else, screw them, especially in sales, man. Like leadership might be a little bit different, but I don't really think it is, because I know all these people who are like, hey, if your people don't want it bad enough, you just got to fire them and bring on new people. And it's like, how are we not going to have the same result? I'm curious. Like I'd really love to know why we think that just like salting the fields and then starting over isn't going to lead to some of the same recurring stuff. Like
everywhere you go, the problem is you. This is what I tell folks who want to salt the fields. You're not salting you're not firing yourself. Weirdly enough, you're not firing yourself. You're still in charge. So until you fire yourself, salting the field does nothing. Burning everything down and destroying everything does nothing. And particularly in the economy that we have today. So we have to live in the reality we're in, not the reality we want. And the reality that we are in right now is we don't have, I mentioned previously in our conversation today, I mentioned the IBM man with the tie and the white shirt, or the black tie and the white shirt with the perfect haircut. You may want that guy, and it is probably a guy, to show up at your sales team. But guess what? That's over. Like the future that the Jetsons projected for us here in the 21st century, weirdly enough, if you watch that cartoon, there were no black people in the Jetsons. Strangely enough. We now have a different future. So we have the gee whiz whatever technology, but the people, the social changes and the cultural changes in the people that we are hiring have to push us to be better leaders. So you can't just fire everybody and rehire the kinds of people you want from the 1950s or the 1970s or whatever halcyon era that is in your head. No, you're going to have to hire people from 2024 or 2025 or 2026 or 2030 or whenever you're listening to this podcast in perpetuity. You're going to have to hire those people from that time. And by the way, you're going to have to adapt to those people in that time, and you're going to have to lead those people in that time.
it's astounding to me, right? Because we're kind of in this weird place of people are going back to offices, and you have lots of people who are at the top of totem poles and they're like, hey, we're not as productive when we're not in the office, but I'm not coming to the office. That's for you guys, right? Which is always very interesting whenever I see a guy like Malcolm Gladwell be like, yeah, we should be back in the office. Cool. Where's your office, buddy? Like, are you going to one? Because I don't think you are. But, you know, man, it's like, these are the red flags that I hear doing my work. Like, why don't my people like want it bad enough? That's a red flag, right? Because that's a problem, right? And then also, you know what? It's just easier if I do it. Get out of the way. That's also a problem, right?
Leaders figure out fundamentally what it is their people need. And then what they do is they move heaven and earth to make sure their people have that. The best leaders I ever worked with in my life, and I haven't had a regular job for many, many years, but the best leaders that I worked with, the best leaders I've coached were the leaders, and in some cases, managers who were transitioning into being leaders, who understood that one of the primary focuses of their role after the self-awareness, after looking at their biases, after growing growing in trust with people and accepting feedback on their blind spots. After they've done these things, one of the biggest things that they had to do was to move roadblocks out of the way of their people for performance. And if you're on a sales team, if you're a high-performing sales professional who is really good at removing your own roadblocks, congratulations. You've won a quarter of the battle. Now you have to win the other 75%. Not even half. Not even half. This isn't G.I. Joe. You've won a quarter of the battle. And now you have to go out and win the other 3/4 of the battle for everyone else so that they can be high performers too. Look, one of the things that high performers do is they realize that they are indispensable. This is an idea from Seth Godin. Mm-hmm. Indispensable doesn't mean unfireable. Indispensable doesn't mean you can never be replaced. Indispensable means it's a real hassle to replace you. And so we don't want to. So the organization, the culture, the team doesn't want to. Well, how do you make yourself indispensable? Well, you make yourself indispensable as a sales professional, particularly a high-performing sales professional, by removing barriers and boundaries for other people so that they can actually succeed and in many cases outproduce you. Your junior should be outproducing you.
Agreed.
That way they can move on and become a senior someplace else.
There's so much to say on this topic because I think that everyone is like, well, yeah, we have a culture of coachability, but they're at the same token, well, let's see who's going to be the top of the leaderboard. Like, you're not creating a culture of coachability to where that top performer is going to be super excited to come tell everyone else what's working for them when there's glory only for the top person, you know? And, okay, I want to jump into the weeds a little bit, right? Some very tactile things, right? Right. I wear this shirt because in sales, there's a lot of things you could be doing, but there's also non-negotiables, chores, right? Chopping wood, carrying water, things that you can do no matter how crazy or strange the situation is to find your path to success, right? Now, as a leader, I'm curious, what are those core fundamentals for new leaders? Like, what are their basic chores that they should be thinking about and doing to really get them to the place to where they own them?
At a very tactile level, some of the basic chores include listening to your people. I've been saying this for years. If you're a new leader or if you're a person who has been promoted into a leadership, quote unquote, position, you have to understand that the position actually doesn't mean anything. The position is just a title. And it really doesn't mean anything. I mean, yeah, okay, maybe you got like 5% more in your check. Okay, maybe, but it actually doesn't mean anything to the people around you. What means something to them is this person who has now been vaunted from the hoi polloi, to use an old term, to the dizzying heights of the hierarchy, is this person actually going to come down and listen to me? That's a very nuts and bolts thing to do. The best leaders do listening tours after they get promoted, and then they shut up and they actually take the advice. And they go back and
I've never heard of this
listening tour. Yeah. So it's this idea. And you will see sometimes corporate executives in the C-suite will talk about doing this, but they do it badly. Dalio talks about it a little bit in his book, Principles.
Such a great book, man. Have you done that assessment?
Such a great book. Not yet. No, I have not. I've seen it, but I have not done that yet.
What are you waiting on? Like, first of all, like, sorry to like step on your toes, but holy crap, man! Like, talk about like sample size and everything. It's 100. Yes. It's 100 question assessment that is absolutely free, and it's funny because I found it after reading the book. The book is so good. Like, talk about owning yourself and like being really self-aware and like doing the work. Like, I imagine that guy was a neurotic head case whenever he first launched that business.
Oh yeah.
I'm sure he's probably still like rigid and kind of hard to work with. And like, I'm not saying he's the pillar of like, hey, I work for you now kind of situation. But like, that book was so helpful to me because it really kind of showed me that there's ways of leaning into like how you need to do it for yourself without becoming like a tyrannical idiot.
Yeah. No, so it's interesting. So on my podcast, I've actually been challenged by one of my guests to bring that book to the podcast.
Oh man, I'm down for that episode.
And so it's interesting because, well, I have a lot of different dynamics around Principles and around Dalio that don't really have anything to do with the content. They just have to do with who I am as a person. Sure. That may be one of the books that we bring. It won't be this year, but next year to the podcast and do a deep dive. Maybe I'll have you come on with that other host, and we can sort of chop up the cheddar on that a little bit.
Down for that. That would be rad.
But the big thing is a listening tour, right? And so going around listening, applying what you're hearing to the particulars of a situation. That's a very practical, tactical thing you could do as a new leader. Another practical, tactical thing you could do as a new leader is, and this is always challenging for new leaders, is to go to those who are up above you and start leading them.
Leading up the chain of command.
The chain of command. Talk
about like, I mean, extreme ownership talks about it. Jocko talks about it all the time and everything else like that, right? There's a right way and a wrong way to do it, right? And I talk about this with salespeople all the time because I know salespeople that are on teams led by managers that have never, ever, ever done the work, and they're looking at data points that don't really matter at all because they've never really been tested or tried or anything, and it's just busy work. And it's like, hey, you're not going to get them to change by being the guy who won't do the work. Like you're going to have to get in there. You're going to have to prove that you did the work, show the work, right? Especially sales side, right? Don't be a rainmaker. Show that you're doing your outreach, show that you're doing your touches, keep really great notes, own your follow-up. Don't have a bunch of hope in your pipeline. But, man, that's a lot to manage and to stay on top of.
It is. And, the great creator of the Abrams tank once had a quote that I used to have on my emails. When you're going to eat an elephant, you eat it one bite at a time. Okay. Just keep chewing, right? I think that one of the other things that you have to do there is you have to begin to, and this is, of course, getting into planning, but you have to make a plan for how you're going to lead. And a lot of people fall into leadership unintentionally. So one day they'll be a high performer. This is what will happen. One day they'll be a high performer. Things are going great. They're rocking, they're rolling, they're meeting their numbers, they're meeting their goals, they're hitting their metrics, everybody's happy, blah, 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 blah. And then someone comes and says, hey, we're promoting you. Congratulations, you've done enough. And they wake up the next day and they have zero plan for what to do. Now, fundamentally, that is a failure of leaders higher than them to actually prepare them. But even when they are prepared, and we do see this in financial services organizations, I won't name specific ones, but I see this in working with financial services organizations where you talked earlier a little bit about a path that people are put on. Yeah, they'll put them on a leadership development path with a lot of bromides and sort of generalized ideas. And when it walks into a very specific situation with a very specific set of people and a very specific team that you now have to lead, those bromides and general ideas don't work. And the failure of coaching on a regular basis to help that person from day one to day whatever is not there. Okay, so just assume it's not going to be there. Fine. Assume that coaching is not going to be there. Assume that on day one of you now moving from, hey, I'm a high performance sales stud, whether you're a male or female, doesn't matter, to now I'm a leader of all these other studs, male or females, doesn't matter. You need to be making an intentional plan for how you're going to go on a listening tour, how you're going to engage in journaling, how you're going to find somebody that you trust and tell them, you're going to be my mother superior. You're going to help me out, I'm going to come to you for a confession. And by the way, you can say anything to me about where my blind spots are, and I will not respond with an ego-driven defensiveness. These are practical steps you can take, tactical steps you can take on day one. And then the hard part comes. But again, you go to the gym all the time, or you hike, or you run, so this should be no problem. The hard part then becomes putting in the discipline to do those things almost every single day. And by the way, I should have gone to the gym this morning, so I'm feeling bad myself.
Okay, so on the opposite side of this, right? Because I like to look at both sides of these things. What is something that you see leaders doing, especially new leaders, young leaders, right? However you want to put that into play, that is not serving them, is not putting them on a path to hitting their goals. It's a time waster. It's a vanity metric. It's not actually helping them improve. What do you see most as a reoccurring issue with new people?
So, and this is probably an issue that's always been around. It just manifests in different spaces. But what I'm seeing with new leaders is a mighty scramble on social media for a tip that will solve everything. And what I will say sometimes to new leaders, and sometimes old leaders too, and I'll say it on this podcast episode today. And I want folks to take this away. I think we've done a lot of takeaways today, but I really want you to take this away if you're a new leader. We don't live in the world of Harry Potter, and the Silver Bullet store is closed if it was ever open in the first place. Now, you'll relate to Harry Potter if you're of a certain age. If you're not of a certain age, you probably won't. You'll relate to the Silver Bullet comment. None of that is showing up. There's no magic from a social media influencer or a popular author or even a book. Like, we've named multiple books today that you can read, right? And you can see behind me on the video. You can't see it obviously on the audio, but when you watch the video of this, you'll see a row of books behind me. I've read a lot of books. I've read a lot of business books. I read a lot of classical literature, and I'm moving more and more into reading classical literature or just literature in general to figure out business principles and leadership principles, because I actually think it's a better tool than yet another business book. Okay, that's just me. That's just my mileage. Your mileage will vary. But you should have mileage. And that mileage should come in the form of at least a bookshelf in your office with some books on it. Social media, LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram Reels will not save you.
Two easy things that are the only two things I need to be a high performer. You want me to go buy books? Come on. Who has time for books? Right?
Well, maybe you'll have time to, I tell you what, here's an idea for you. If you have no time for books, here's what I tell people in coaching situations. Just watch one less Netflix show.
I mean, you and I are obviously on the micro habit train and everything else like this, but I can't tell you how many people I talk to who are like in leadership roles, and like the last book they read was Harry Potter when it was new, and I'm like, what inputs are you ingesting, if any at all? Or are you just coming locked and loaded thinking that like your stuff doesn't stink? Because it does. We've already talked about that. But like, it always astounds me whenever I meet someone who is claiming to be like a really high performer, and like there's no path, there's no books, there's no knowledge. It's just like try hard and loud opinions.
Well, and
Uh-oh.
We've all in sales.
Don't back away from the line. Jump into the deep end. Come on, that's why you're here, man.
I've had this in my head probably for the last 10 minutes, because it popped up and I was like, I don't know where I'm going to insert this, but here's where I'm going to insert it here. Here's the moment. This is how my brain works. We've all seen the high performing salesperson on Instagram Reels standing next to a Lambo with a beautiful looking person talking about how they made $250,000 before you clicked on Instagram. And if you just give them $5.99, they'll tell you how to do the same thing. All of that is trash. All of that's trash. I can't think of a better term. It's just garbage. It's just garbage content. It's garbage advertising.
That's the title of this episode. All of that is trash. And like,
not trash, just trash.
Just trash. Yeah.
There's no value in any of that. Where the value is going to be in the old things. Now, let me give you a perfect example. Let me back this up. Here's where my mileage goes. So on my desk currently, which none of you all can see that, but either on the audio or the video, but on my desk currently, there are 3 books out of the 5 I've got in rotation that I'm reading right now. Now, these 3 are for the podcast, but they're also for business and leadership. One of the books, I'll give you the 3 titles. One of the books is The Power of the Powerless by Václav Havel. The other book is City of God by St. Augustine of Hippo. And the other book is, you're going to love this, Lolita by Vladimir Nabokov.
Yeah, that's a right field selection for sure.
That is a right field selection, right? And then the other 2 books are Extreme Ownership, which I just did that with just did a training focused around that. And then of course one of them that I had to go and pull because it was referred by another person for some other work that I'm doing, Good to Great by Jim Collins. And I knew where I wanted to go, and I just went in there and pulled the thing out that I needed. Okay, those are the 5 books on my desk. 3 of those 5, 60% of them, are not a traditional business book with a tip or an idea or a trick in it. And by the way, this is not unusual for me. Normally I have, and this is a low number of books on my desk. Normally I have 6 to 7 books just hanging out here and that are in various stages of completion. So when I go to Barnes & Noble and I go to the sales and marketing and leadership and business section in Barnes & Noble, and I pick up a book that's trying to sell me something, I can look at it in a heartbeat and tell if it's flat and full of garbage. Even if it's written by a celebrity, even if it has some great tip in it, even if it's 250 pages of nonsense, and there might be one tip in there that might be good, but I'm not going to wade through 250 pages of nonsense in order to get there. And that's what reading as a sales professional does for you. So when you go to seek out a resource, you now have an intuition and an understanding based on the reps that you put in with the book of whether or not the advice is good. And then you can look at the social media post. You can look at the Instagram reel I just named with the oiled up guy and the Lambo, and all I remember when all the Bitcoin people were doing that, or not the Bitcoin, the cryptocurrency people were doing that years and years ago. Oh my God, I laughed. Drove me absolutely crazy, right? You can see all of this. And by the way, as a young leader, it can slide off of you like water off a duck's back. You won't be influenced by any of it. Instead, you'll go towards the deeper things and actually become a better leader to the people in your real life who really matter. And you'll do a lot less posturing on LinkedIn. And we all need less of that.
All right, man. So I respect your time, and I want to make sure we make the most of it. So a couple more kind of rapid fire questions, and then I can let you go about your day. Of all the books we've talked about, right? And I'm gonna kind of boil this down. If you're a new leader, and you're gonna recommend one book, not for the sake of it being a silver bullet, but being something that you think is gonna kind of cause that curiosity and that shift to get people on the path that they need to be on, what is the book?
Yep. So if I were going to recommend one book, sort of a traditional quote unquote business book, I would recommend Linchpin by Seth Godin.
Okay. Whoa. That's not
that book.
What I expected.
Yeah. That book set me on the path of entrepreneurship, but it also set me on the path of changing my mindset about leadership and about what is capable of leadership and what is capable of leaders. It also set me in the direction of rethinking how I thought about leadership and where the actual puck was going in terms of society, culture, ideas. Been hugely influential underneath at the very root, at the very base of what I have done over the course of time.
Really?
That would be probably there's, like you said, there's no silver bullet. That would probably be the one that I would recommend most strongly if you wanted like a root, but maybe not a root, like a seed book in the nonfiction space. Now in the fiction space.
Ooh, I love a fiction recommendation. Let's go.
Yeah, I'm going to make a fiction recommendation. I've read this book almost once a year, every year since I was like 8 years old. So it's sort of it's in the concrete. Yeah, it's part of my DNA at this point. The Sun Also Rises by Ernest Hemingway.
Really?
Yep.
I was not. So first of all, I've read a couple of Godin books. It's never really done anything for me. I've not read Linchpin, but I'll go take a look just because you're talking about it so highly.
Yep.
I haven't read any Hemingway in probably 20 years. Might be time for me to go dig back into that.
You might want to go dig back into Hemingway. It is a book that is deceptively, and we've covered it on my podcast. It's a book that is deceptively simple on the surface. But what it reveals about the interactions between people in places that we don't talk about is hugely important for how leaders can lead teams, how leaders can look for that emotional flavor that's occurring inside of their teams, but also how leaders can monitor and see the interactions and the iterations of interactions over the course of time between people. People are not always what they seem on top.
For sure.
And a good leader is looking for the things that are unseen as well as the things that are obvious.
Okay, I love that. Now, because I am a data-driven person, and this is a question I've been trying to workshop because I do think that data does tell a tale. Now, you need to know the data points you need to look at. My personal belief is that any one data point is probably an egoic battle that's not worth fighting. But two, you're starting to define some things. So from a hard data perspective, if you're on a leadership path, are there data points like really worth zeroing in on and paying a lot of attention to because they are kind of like guiding metrics?
The number of write-ups you've had to give people for things that would almost be immaterial.
Oh, right. So like that. How would I say that? So like having to coach people on things that you don't think you should have to coach them on.
Not only that, but you've coached them on things you don't think you have to coach them on, and now you're in a system. You're now in the performance evaluation system. You're now in the formalized system, and now that paperwork's working its way through the system, which creates a data point, which can now be tracked across time. And what happens with a lot of leaders, whether they are in sales, operations, marketing, finance, does not matter. Once you go into the formalized system that creates data points, now you're just going to default to that every single time because it's just quote unquote easier to file the paperwork than it is to go deal with the human being.
Yeah, for sure.
And that's a strong metric that there might be a leadership failure somewhere in your approach, somewhere in the approach of the person, somewhere in the relationship between you and the person. And yes, I mean, look, it may be that you have to fire them, but if you haven't, sometimes I'll have leaders who will tell me in a lot of different roles, they'll tell me, well, son, I've done absolutely everything. And now we're in this performance evaluative process and it's a write-up.
Yeah.
And I asked them, did you really do everything? I mean, like everything?
Well, that's the Jocko line, right? Like there was one episode where he talks about, someone asks him a question of like, how do you know when it's time to let someone go? And he goes, when you can honestly tell yourself that you have given this person every opportunity imaginable, you can't think of anything else like at all. And you know that when you go to bed that night, you're still going to feel like, you know what, we did everything we could. It just wasn't a fit. That's when it's time to let him go. But most people want to let people go. And I've been this guy because I'm a bit of a problem child. I don't have a problem talking back or asking hard questions. Of like, sometimes it's just convenient to get the guy who's asking hard questions out of there and stuff like that.
Not only is it convenient, but I go a step further than Jocko because that's a little bit where I'm at. But I go to the point of, have you done all of the things that make you uncomfortable as a leader with that person?
I have a guy in my DMs right now, and like, he's a marketer, and he has a salesperson, commission-only salesperson, right? Which creates all of its own problems, right? You're not paying for basic time and attention and focus. Why are you expecting a high performer to take your calls? So anyway, so the guy's not performing, and he's frustrated, right? And he's like, I'm just going to get rid of him and bring someone else in. Cool. What's going to be different next time? And he's like, well, and I said, cool. This would be different if you had the basics of this skill set under your belt. You would be able to coach and teach and help this person understand where it is. But because you don't have it, they have to be the problem, right? Because every founder that I talk to, including that, well, like I can, I've closed deals. Okay, great. There's a difference between parachuting in onto a call to wrap up the little bitty red lines or provide clarity and being the person who's doing it day in, day out, all the time, doing the follow-up, doing the qualifying, doing the closing. Like being able to drop in and be like, oh yeah, look how great I am is not getting you set up for like sales success.
Leo DiCaprio playing Jordan Belfort in Wolf of Wall Street is a fantasy, kids.
Yeah, for sure. 1,000%. Like,
it's a
and
fantasy.
he even says that he doesn't do it that way anymore,
Right.
So
it's a sales fantasy. So is Glengarry Glen Ross, by the way.
1,000%. Like,
it's also a sales fantasy.
I
had to drop those two in on you.
God, I love Mammon. Like I think he's one of the best like conversational dialogue writers on the planet, him and Sorkin. But that movie's not doing my industry any favors at all.
No.
At all, right? Always be closing, coffees for closers, right? You're fired until you earn your spot. Like, but we want people to be high performers and give back to other people on this team so that way they're not like individual black boxes of like revenue, But we're going to talk to people this way. Like a friend of mine, he sells boxes. And he's actually my accountability partner. And we've been meeting every other Friday for years, right? He calls me on my crap. I call him on his. We know each other's goals. And it's so funny because he's a field rep, okay? Commission only. And he'll show up. Now, he had some ramp up time and everything else like that, but, it transitions. So that way it's commission only. It's his book of business, right? And he'll go in with an order. And people are like, been on the golf course all day. Just because he's not in the office, and it's like the absurdity of that statement, because if you're the salesperson who's only in the office when you're supposed to be out in the field, like courting relationships and building, guess what? You just get fired. Now, of course, everyone else who has a very short leash, right, and no chaos in their life because they're not in sales has a problem with it. But it's like the weird skewed view of like sales to every other thing, right? Like, there's lots of good reasons to hate salespeople, right? But largely it comes down to the fact that the goals are not clear. There's a pressure to be always on and hustling and closing everything. And then when you close something and then your delivery team hates you for it because it wasn't aligned, it was a bad fit, but you've got goals, and it's a room full of mixed signals.
Yes, and at a higher level, and this is where, I've done a lot of work in organizational management and organizational behavior. And I hate to frame it this way, but it's the best way to frame it for folks. That is an organizational cultural problem.
Oh, agreed, for sure.
And so, one of the things that I don't think we covered it today, but it's this idea of where does the buck stop, right?
Yeah.
And so, does the buck stop at the senior VP's office? Does the buck stop at the CEO? Does the buck stop at the board? When I used to teach organizational behavior and organizational management in colleges and universities to students, we would always look at these case studies. And, some of the most notorious case studies we ever looked at were case studies of the banking company Wells Fargo, right?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, my Lord. And maybe it's because I'm a person with strong ethics. Maybe it's because I'm a person who understands just how human beings, I won't say behave, but engage with each other around sales when they're being pushed by a culture to do a particular thing, and they've never actually questioned that. But at a certain point in those case studies, you would get to a point where, and by the way, you can see these in Harvard Business Review case studies. You can see this again on LinkedIn if you go and look. You can see this everywhere. You would see that there was someone in the organization, whether it was in sales or any of the other parts of the organization, who had to, in the culture, say, stop, stand athwart the culture and say stop in order to get something to change.
Yeah.
This is very, very challenging, I can imagine, for sales folks, because saying stop means the gravy train stops.
Yeah.
And that directly impacts your pocket. It directly impacts your mortgage. It directly impacts, as Jay-Z would say, the size of your plates. And I don't know what the size of your plates are. I can't speak to that. You have to make some decisions about what those are.
Yeah.
And I think what has happened because of recent political, cultural, and societal events that we all have lived through collectively together is that, and this ties back to something that I said earlier, about people hiring the people who are living in 2024, not the people in 1974. Okay. Well, the people who are living in 2024, all of us have lived through these events, and we're understanding where the no is. We're understanding where the line is. And organizational cultures are going to have to shift and change around that idea of where the buck stops. And it's slowly happening. It never happens fast enough, but it's slowly happening. I'm seeing little green shoots popping up everywhere. And future leaders are going to be the ones who do stand up and who do say, no, the buck stops with me. Mm-hmm. And the people who were on the other side of that are going to be the people who, quite frankly, are going to be left behind.
Right. If I'm hearing you correctly, I think the takeaway from there is, philosophically, I think you need to kind of make your own decision about where the buck stops within your role, right? But I'm curious, how do you get people to adjust that lane if they need to? Because, I mean, if it's a blind spot, you're trying to own everything, and they're like, hey, stay in your lane, right? Because I talk a lot about the idea that selling in the right lane for you, right? If you're a technical person and a strategic person, you need to go sell something technical and strategic with a long selling cycle. Like putting that person on a used car lot and just getting to push people into cars is not going to work, right? And the opposite side of that doesn't work as well. How do people do a better job of drawing those lines the right way? And should that be collaborative? Is that part of like the grooming and the onboarding process? Or is it something you have to go figure out on your own and just kind of like live and let live with whatever happens?
No, I think it's part of the grooming and the onboarding process. And I think that happens unintentionally during the grooming and onboarding process anyway.
Yeah.
We just aren't intentional about it, right? We just aren't out loud about it. Like, everyone knows when you first get hired into a role there's the first 3 months of, and we know this from, sort of how teams form, but it's this idea of forming, right? And forming happens over the first 90 to 180 days of a person getting into a new role, right? Yeah. Forming is when individuals who are new are most malleable. That's when challenges around psychological safety, engagement, those kinds of things really begin to pop up, right? And I've avoided the use of sort of those catch-all terms, but I want to use them here because this is really what happens during the forming stage. It is also during that time that culture begins to grow. And what happens is the people who are more veteran, who have already normed and then stormed and are now sort of in this tranche of the dysfunction or the function that we have is normal, they are inculcating the new people into the norm. By the way, this is happening alongside of the work being done, the sales being closed, the processes being taught, all of this. Well, organizations tend to focus a lot on the nuts and bolts stuff and very little on the culture stuff that's occurring at that emotional and psychological level for individuals. Mm-hmm. And I think organizations are beginning to go more in that direction. We're seeing some of this with DE&I, some of this with ESG. I think those are ham-fisted efforts. Because you need a scalpel, not a hammer, to get this stuff done. But it has to occur during the onboarding and during the grooming and during the forming process when someone first comes in, and it has to be done intentionally. I'm a big fan of, as a consultant and as a coach, I'm a big fan of front loading the hard work, because if you don't front load the hard work, then you wind up having problems in the back. But we have to define clearly what the hard work is. And if we're not defining clearly what the hard work is, then what exactly are we front loading? Are we front loading paperwork? Are we front loading getting processes filled out? Are we front loading looking good to our peers? Are we front loading fitting into the culture? What are we front loading? So if you're a sales professional, should you go out for drinks to form better bonds with your team? Maybe, maybe not. What are we front loading? What is the important thing?
Well, so you mentioned some books on here, so I'm going to throw one your way. I don't know if you've read this or not, but Annie Duke has a book, right? Actually, two books that are both very, very, very good. The first one's called Thinking in Bets, and the other one is like it's about quitting, really. And I'm blanking on the name, but I think it's that second book, she talks about this idea that when you're building a business, and I love this metaphor, there's always the stuff that you can do to procrastinate on it, right? And I think she's talking about the Slack story, about how the guy was trying to build a game and then like realized that it was going to be a dead end, and so he pivoted to Slack. And he kind of has this metaphor talking about the idea that like you're always going to have to like teach walruses how to juggle, and you're also going to need to build a platform so that way people can see them. But building a platform is obviously way easier than teaching a walrus to juggle, right? So like if you're not leaning into that, but you're over here tasking everyone to build all the platforms, eventually the platforms are going to be built. You're not going to have anything to put on it. Which, like, hearing it discussed that way blew my mind, right? Super solid book. And honestly, because I come from a poker background, I played poker for a while, I didn't lean into these books whenever they first hit the scene and people started talking about it, because I was like, oh, I know what these books are about. No, they're really, really, really solid books, honestly. Both of them are. But that idea of, are you doing the easy work and are you even aware that you're avoiding the hard work, right? Because like avoidance is the thing we've not talked about here, but it is super easy to avoid the core work, right? Like one-to-ones, building relationships, right? And that's really what this thing is about. Before you go try to do anything fancy, you've got to be able to like just chop wood and do the chores of the bare minimums to like do the job.
One of the problems, the massive problems in sales, and it's everywhere, but we're gonna place it in sales, because it's endemic throughout our current society and culture. And I don't know how I won't say I don't know how we fix it. What I will say is I think the fixes are beginning to occur. But again, we didn't wind up here in 10 minutes, so we're not going to get out of here in 10 minutes.
Yeah.
And it does go back to this idea of 10 minutes. What we've talked about today may sound like pull the lever, talk about being a poker player. I'm going to think of it like a slot machine. I put in the quarter, I pull the lever on the one-arm bandit, and all of a sudden I'm a 10,000-aire. That's just another variation of the silver bullet idea. None of the things that you and I have talked about today are silver bullets. It will take you, and someone actually told me this, a fellow consultant told me this idea, and I've kept it with me the entire time I've been an entrepreneur. It will take you 10 years to be an overnight success.
Yeah, absolutely.
It just will. And we have built such instant gratification dopamine structures into our society and culture that we say the 10 years to be an overnight success, but the things that are required, like taking 10 years to teach a walrus to juggle before you build a platform, we think about that and we go, you know what, I'd just rather go build a platform.
Yeah.
Or weirdly enough, I'd rather stand next to the guy who taught the walrus to juggle. Let me hook onto that guy. Now, you can say over the long course of history, such is the way it has always been. And I'm an amateur historian too. And so, of course, history doesn't rhyme, but it does echo. And there are echoes in our current time for everything that has gone on in the past. And so this is nothing new. Yeah. We will have those people who will be willing to put in that 10 years. But the drop off between year one and year two, and the drop off between year two and year three, and the drop off between year three, that is the refining process.
Yeah.
And if you don't know what's required, or if you're unwilling to go through the refining process, this is where Seth Godin also wrote a book about quitting called The Dip, which kind of has some of the same ideas that you were talking about in the Annie Duke book. You have to realize that into becoming a better sales leader, there are going to be dips between year one and year two, and year two and year three, and year three and year four. And you have absolutely no idea where those dips are going to be.
1,000%. And it's so funny because this leads me to the story that I tell others about you. I don't know that I've shared this with you or not, but I think in our first conversation, we were kind of sharing our backgrounds. And this is when I knew we were going to be like friends, and you talked about starting over in your new art, since we're not putting all these labels on the arts, right? And after that first session, you're just smoked, covered in sweat, just like going through it, just like everyone does, and someone kind of came by and they were kind of like, hey, it's okay, thinking that you're on the ledge, right? And your response to the person was like, hey, I'm fine. I'm just trying to figure out if I'm going to commit 10 years to being good at this or not, And it's like, I had the same thing whenever I started over in my first jiu-jitsu class, right? And everyone's like, hey man, we know it's tough. And I'm like, yeah, I'm trying to figure out if this is the path that I want to, I'm not scared of the work, it was years between my exams at the farthest end of my martial arts journey, 5 years between the tests. I'm fine sucking for a very long time. But I just loved how you talked about that of well, here's 10 years if I want, right? But you're also adult enough, seasoned enough to be able to kind of put that into a realistic hierarchy with everything else in your life, because as a parent, as an entrepreneur, as a person who's doing everything else that you're doing, it's this might not all fit within the day, right? And so now there's some stakes to the decision-making thing. And I tell every person I talk to who gets a little bit weirded out whenever I start talking about martial arts and everything, and well, John, aren't you trying a little bit too hard? And it's if you're not trying, you're not getting to greatness.
Exactly.
So, all right, man.
Exactly.
Man, dude, this was amazing. Thank you so much. We went long, which I kind of assumed was going to happen because it's us. But, dude, amazing conversation. So much really, really cool stuff. Where should people come hang out with you if they want to learn more about what you're doing?
Absolutely. Well, thank you, John, for having me on. You've been on my show a couple times. I wanted to repay the favor. I really love the format. I love what you're doing here. I think this is going to be fabulous. This is amazing. This is the walrus juggling part, right? Yeah. So this is good.
Yes, absolutely.
And I don't know how to juggle, so this is going to be really good for me. It's going to take me 10 years to be good at it. It's good. It's fine. It's only 10 years. If people want to get a hold of me, if people want to track me down, if people want to find out where I am, all they have to do is go to leadershiptoolbox.us. That is my website. If you try other websites with which my name is associated, you will probably get a 404 error message because we're collapsing all of my websites down into one. That way we have one hub. That's the process that we're going through right now. We've been going through it all this quarter. We'll probably be going through all the next quarter, but that main Leadership Toolbox website is up. So go check me out at leadershiptoolbox.us.
Love it.
If you want to listen to the podcast, which I recommend that you do, we do long form conversations with interesting folks like John and many other people around books that you may have fallen asleep to reading in high school. So if you're a sales professional, you should probably be reading Sense and Sensibility, and you're probably going to need a guide for that. Mm-hmm. I'm willing to be your Sherpa, as are my guest co-hosts. So check out the leadership lessons from the Great Books podcast on all the major podcast players where you go and listen to podcasts. Yes, we are on YouTube. We're on Spotify. We're on, we used to be on Stitcher before that service shut down. But now we are on Apple iTunes as well. So go and check us out everywhere. And by the way, leave a 5-star review. We always ask for those if you like the show. If you don't like the show, there's plenty of other leadership shows for you to listen to, including John's show, which are quite good. So go listen to those. And finally, if you'd like to pick up a book about all this that kind of condenses down some of the things that John and I have been talking about today, go check out my book, 12 Rules for Leaders, The Foundation of Intentional Leadership, co-written with Bradley Madigan. You can go get that on Amazon or anywhere else where you buy books. Just go and type my name into that search bar on Amazon and it'll pop right up.
Awesome, man. Thank you so much for doing this. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me on, and keep going forward in what you're doing here. You're doing a great thing.
Thank you, man. I appreciate it.